Hello, everyone, wherever you are. Welcome to this INQAAHE Talks. This is a webinar series designed to connect our membership, our INQAAHE members, with the wider international higher education and quality assurance community in discussing today's pressing issues. My name is Fabrizio Trifiro. I serve as an INQAAHE board member. I'm a program director for the Education World Forum, and I will be chairing today's session. In this session, as you know, we'll be exploring the evolving relationship between quality assurance in higher education and the university rankings, highlighting the distinct roles, the key differences, the respective strengths, but also the opportunities for synergy and mutual reinforcement. To inform our discussion and to guide us in discussing this very interesting topic, we are joined by 4 distinguished international experts who bring different experiences and perspectives to the topic. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists for today's session. Ellen Hazelcorn, Professor Emeritus at the Technological University, Dublin. Ishan Kada, Senior Director Consultancy at Times Higher Education. Lynette Kizaka, former Deputy Director at the Kenya Commission for University Education, and our own Olgun Sisek, INQAAHE board member. This session will be very much a conversational session, an interactive session. We won't have PowerPoint presentations, but we will engage directly in discussion. But before getting started, a few words about housekeeping. We have muted all your microphones to help with the smooth running of the event, and your cameras have also been disabled, so we can't either see you or hear you, but we are very keen to hear from you. So please do use the Q&A function to raise any questions you may have or make any comments. It is really a great occasion to engage in conversation on a very topical issue with international experts in the field. Also, the webinar will be recorded and it will be made available after the event. Last but not least, I would like to thank the INQAAHE Secretariat, who in the background are making sure that everything runs smoothly. Now, without further ado, I would like to start our conversation with an opening question to our panelists. What do you see as the defining features of quality assurance in university rankings? And what do you see as the main fundamental differences? Now, Ellen, if I might start with you, I will then go to Ishan, then Lynette, and then Olgun. Ellen, you got the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Certainly, it's afternoon where I am in Ireland, and thank you very much. Let me start like this. The right to quality education throughout life is a fundamental principle of the UNESCO New Social Contract for Education. Fundamental to achieving this goal is quality assurance, and having a quality QA system based on internationally benchmarked common principles and practices. Higher education has traditionally relied on peer review and self-reporting, embedded in a quality culture with ownership and responsibility, resting with autonomous higher education institutions, and overseen by regulations in different countries and indeed internationally. INQAAHE, the European Quality Assurance Register, is a really good example of where we have upfront trustworthy information about accreditation. In contrast, rankings popularity or rankings are perceived as having the ability to answer the question, which university is best? And the question is then assessed according to indicators and a methodology and weightings chosen by the individual ranking companies. Its simplicity makes it attractive. It's just like searching for restaurants or hotels. I recently did looking for a holiday in Malta. So yes, I'll go on to the system. But rankings measure all institutions according to the same criteria, regardless of context or mission, an approach which is contrary to international advice. Again, referring to UNESCO and the Global Convention on the Recognition of Qualifications, UNESCO refers specifically to respect, uphold, and protect the autonomy and diversity of higher education institutions and systems. So one of the fundamental problems is that the concept of quality is itself problematic. There's no internationally agreed definition as to what it is, how it's measured, much less how it's improved. Everyone has its own perspective, as evidenced by different approaches, methodologies, choice of indicators, and so on. OECD refers to rankings as pursuing or portraying a perception of quality. Hence, the word quality itself is variable and is shaped by whoever decides, rather than on a basis of standards. So quality assurance through an international framework, and indeed the work of INQAAHE, along with other regional networks, helps to shape a general international understanding of what we mean by quality. And its quality is the trust in the quality of higher education and research that arguably that goes beyond self-declaration to what I call external verification that is severely being tested currently. And we can explore those issues.
Thank you very much, Ellen. You already introduced some interesting angles, in particular, the diversity of views about quality. Ishan, if I can go to you as representing one of the leading world university rankings, do you see, I mean, I'm going to ask you the same question, what do you see as the defining features of quality assurance and rankings? What are the main differences? But do you see university rankings as measuring quality or as doing something different?
Thank you, Fabrizio, and thank you, INQAAHE, for inviting me to this really interesting and very prescient webinar on the issue of quality assurance and rankings. I'm no expert in quality assurance, although I have had quality assurance roles before. I should also say here that I personally am not invested in the idea of rankings themselves, but really what I will do is try to approach how rankings play out in terms of the work that I do, which is fundamentally consultative and advisory. So I lead our government and transnational education and sustainability portfolios at Times Higher Education. I'll very briefly go over the question of quality. Again, I don't want to kind of take away anyone else's expertise here, but fundamentally, I would see quality assurance as input-led systems that bring shape to the overall kind of quality of programs and some institutional elements, but by no means all, and by no means universal, as Professor Hazel Korn has definitively outlined there. I do not see rankings as particularly measuring or doing the same thing. It clearly has an output-led focus, but there are measures of rankings which are input-focused as well. So, for example, when we look at the World University Rankings from Times Higher Education, which is an approach broadly shared, let's say, by some other international rankings agencies, we do have some input indicators as well. So, for example, the level of research income, the level of income derived from industry, as well as some more essential statistics around university shape and size as measured through students and staff. I don't particularly think those are quality measures. What they do is just indicate and help universities benchmark and help governments benchmark levels of activity within the university, which can be important to help shape decision making. So, for example, we've worked extensively with ministries to help them understand what levels of funding are needed for research across different fields which are related to their economic ambitions. So in those kind of cases, aggregate understandings of income, which are not collected universally in any other kind of way, can really help those kind of universities and governments make those decisions. There are other quality output indicators. So, for example, our rankings is we work with Elsevier on a variety of research quality metrics. We've taken quite a lot of steps in consultation with the sector, I have to say, to ensure that any ability to kind of overrepresent or distort research quality is mitigated. So in 2023, for example, we introduced 3 new research quality metrics that we developed in-house at Times Higher Education. We've never shied away from the fact that the global university rankings are a research intensive or rankings that are perhaps shaped by the more traditional conception of a university as a research intensive institution. And I really do take on the point that that is not necessarily the right thing for all institutions to be represented, particularly if it's outside of their mission or their founding purpose, for example. I think that for our rankings, they are completely voluntary. So, you know, we only have, well, I think maybe in next week's World University rankings, which are released, there's around 2,500 participants overall. So, you know, it's a very small fraction of the university population worldwide. Nevertheless, I think for some universities, even if their original teaching missions were teaching orientated or even vocational focused, some do want to provide data because, again, it helps them understand their benchmarks across different metrics. And we have 18 metrics overall that will help them, again, just put into place policies or strategies or internal monitoring and evaluation systems that can support improvements. So I think if we are to consider rankings at all in terms of what it means to the relationship with quality, my feeling and when I work with universities and governments is to move away from the rank as being a determinant issue and really to delve deep into the data, which offers an extraordinarily rich ecosystem of kind of analytics to drive various policies forward. I will say also that, you know, it is important that robust criticism is leveled at those metrics as well, because I think they change over time. One thing that we don't have in our Times Higher Education rankings is employability outcomes or graduate outcomes as a measure of a university's rank. And that is a deficiency. We don't have the student voice particularly included in that as well. And I was in India delivering seminars on trying to think about how to use rankings better when advising students. And, you know, I try to sway the conversation away from just thinking about rank, look beneath and see what exists for research quality or the research environment or the international outlook of a university, because that may help drive choice for students in a different way as well. So all of these need to be addressed. I absolutely agree with that. But equally, we've taken a position at Times Higher Education that if we don't feel that the data or methodology is robust enough, then we shouldn't include it. So we didn't want to rush and create an employability metric when we understand the huge challenges, for example, of deploying a global survey for students on that. So I think we are always looking to ways of reforming that. So I'll conclude by saying here that if there is a relationship between rankings and quality, it's within the data and the way in which governments and universities can use that for various monitoring and evaluations on those particular metrics. But I don't think it should replace or does necessarily come into the same role as quality assurance as a fundamental activity.
Thank you very much, Ishan. That's really, really interesting, and thank you very much for the candid assessment of some of the strengths and features of ranking vis-a-vis quality assurance. We will dwell on specific benefits and strengths of the two systems later on in conversation. You mentioned employability. It is very interesting because, of course, there's been over the years, and again, we will explore this further, a movement by part of certain quality assurance systems to adopt more output-oriented approaches, more metrics. In England, the Office for Students, for example, has traditionally considered employment after graduation as one of the criteria for the regulation. In a recent consultation, I seem to understand they suggested perhaps to place less emphasis on that because it is, as you were saying, a very challenging aspect to measure and to make sense of, in particular at an international level. But moving on, Lynette, over to you. What do you see as the main features of quality assurance ranking from your experience and perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Fabrizio, and greetings to everyone that is following us from all over the world. I am speaking to you from Nairobi in Kenya, the eastern side of Africa. I have had a career of about 12 years in quality assurance, and therefore I stand in a position where I could discuss many things concerning quality assurance. But because in today's conversation, we would like to look at the evolving relationship between quality assurance and ranking, you might want to know that African universities are not prominently in the ranking systems of the world. And those that appear probably do not appear very close to the top. And this could be attributed to what Ishan said a while back, that the ranking mechanisms are research intensive. And as you know, research requires a lot of investment in terms of financial resources, equipment, and so on and so forth. And many African countries may not do very well when it comes especially to financing, equipment, and so on. So that already places African universities at a disadvantage when it comes to ranking. And quality assurance is something that African universities have been embracing perhaps only in the last 40 or so years in earnest, following the Bologna process. And there has been a lot of effort in institutionalizing quality assurance internally in the universities, and then creating or putting in place external quality assurance agencies to support the internal quality assurance mechanisms in universities. And so in the African context, we are a lot more focused on quality assurance than on rankings. And as you know, quality assurance is context specific. And being context specific is advantageous in the sense that we all have the standards and guidelines available to us, and we aspire to reach the required level in each of those standards and guidelines. And I think in view of the fact that African universities are not very strongly inclined towards ranking, the Africa Union has focused more on the African quality rating mechanisms, where we have universities rate themselves, and then we have an external expert team come to validate their own ratings. Because with rating, it is possible to take criterion by criterion, and the African quality rating mechanism, which is really a tool that is aimed to support higher education institutions to strengthen the internal quality assurance mechanisms, has very clear standards for institutional level rating and for program level rating. And so you will find that our focus in the African setup in quality assurance is at institutional and program level, where there is accreditation for both. And after accreditation, then there is the quality audit, where the system that is put in place to ensure compliance or conformance to those standards is serving the universities well. And so the focus in Africa is to improve the trust in all these processes and mechanisms has been to develop tools that will sort of harmonize the accreditation and quality assurance processes. We have, for example, the African Standards and Guidelines. We have the African Continental Qualifications Framework. We have the Africa Quality Rating Mechanism that I just spoke about, and we have the Africa Credit Accumulation and Transfer System, because we would like to have the mobility to see that if students move or faculty move or programs move across borders, then they are comparable. We can speak to the qualifications in a way that can be trusted and confident. We are able to probably reduce bias in all of these things. So I don't know whether we would really say that in the African situation, we are very inclined towards using ranking for purposes of quality assurance. Of course, there are interventions, especially in the area of research, for example. And research is one of the criteria for even rating in the African continent. It's one of the criteria for quality assurance. So indeed, there are intersections. And if especially ranking was more open, you see, I think Ishan mentioned that they do not include, for example, student perspectives. In Africa, we have a very strong presence of students. The Association of African Universities has a very, very strong association of all Africa Association of Students. And the students are now a very central part in the quality assurance initiatives and efforts. So I would say basically in those many areas, perhaps Africa is more inclined towards quality assurance and much less towards ranking.
Thank you, Lynette. Thank you very much for bringing in the regional perspective. There's probably I should know that, but who manages this African rating mechanism that you talked about?
Yeah, it is the Association of African Universities, which is based in Accra, Ghana, that is actually responsible for the implementation of the Africa Quality Rating Mechanism on behalf of the African Commission, Union Commission, yes.
So university rate themselves, and then international peers come to confirm and validate the ratings.
For so far it has been piloted under the Harmonization of African Higher Education Quality Assurance and Accreditation Initiative, an initiative of the European Union, the DAAD, Obrel Global, the Africa Union. They have so far piloted 15 universities from across the 5 regions. So the universities have to themselves rate at least 4 times, rate every quarter 4 times, and then they can have a team come to validate their ratings. And the rating instrument is also very, very comprehensive, guided by the 14 standards that I mentioned earlier, which are not different from the INQAAHE standards, by the way.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lynette. And Olgun, just before coming to you, a quick reminder to people to ask any questions they have in the QA function. I saw there was a raised hand earlier on by someone. I don't know whether that was someone wishing to ask a question. Please do use the Q&A function rather than the chat, so that we can focus just on that function to ask questions to our panelists. Olgun, over to you. You've been doing some research of late and some thinking around the relationship between quality assurance and ranking.
Exactly, Fabrizio. I mean, thanks very much. Really, it's great to have this session. I believe it is first of its kind so far that we are discussing with colleagues from ranking community as well. I was in a conference in THE in Baku last week, and we had a really wonderful keynote with Phil Betty. And even there, we come up with that this is not a two different world, to be honest. The ultimate goal is to come up with a quality education and sustainable graduates for employability. So that's our maybe common denominator. So taking it from there, yes, I have been working and thinking and presenting this topic over a year now, because the ultimate goal is really not to achieve somewhere in rankings or not to be accredited, but to have a real sustainable quality for all in the long run. To achieve that, as Ishan clearly mentioned, ranking is more focused on research, let's say research is intensive, whereas the accreditation, we are more focused in the teaching and learning. So that could be a complementary, for example. And in terms of voluntary versus compulsory, yes, the rankings are voluntary. As far as accreditation is concerned, when it's the national agency or the institution accreditation, it's compulsory. But on the other hand, if it is international accreditation and program level accreditation, it is voluntary. So there are lots of similarities and common room to align. I was discussing with my colleagues from the ranking community that the QA component is missing maybe in their part. So that's where we can find an alignment of ranking with quality assurance so that it could have a really much value and added impact to the end users and institutions as well. So that's one thing. Therefore, there might be different methodologies, but at the end of the day, we use the same data and we have similar criteria to come up with some conclusion from both sides. Another topic maybe we should discuss further later or in other occasions is the role of AI. Now, AI is everywhere. It's really affecting, it's like a game changer for rankings as well as for us as accreditors. So that's the technology is really pushing us to find a common room maybe for the betterment as well. So I was thinking that maybe we should find some clear boundaries and connection points between the quality assurance and rankings. As I said, it's not two different words, but I believe it's complementary. So the universities are, I was telling in another conference in the US that universities are preferring the shortcuts, I would call. So the quality assurance process that we do is peer review, site visits, reports, and lots of long processes and paperwork and details and so forth. But in terms of rankings, they just submit their data and then they wait for the results. So for me, it's like a shortcut. Therefore, we have to really come up with some scheme and methodology that at least they also contribute something in return so that they get a reflection and value for themselves at the same time. Another important aspect where we can align is the SDGs. That was our discussion in the last week's summit, that both the rankings as well as the accreditation agencies are now more focused on the SDGs because universities are ahead of us. They are already engaged with the SDGs and really doing great with all of them. So as both world, we have to come up with like a common room for SDG 4, quality of education. So that could be another added value to our community. Last but not the least is the internationalization. So I think rankings and accreditation has a really great impact and implementation in terms of internationalization of higher educations, in terms of international student recruitment, in terms of mobility between, or in terms of collaboration between institutions. So these are really the important cornerstones that we have to find some common room to make it much more stronger, meaningful, and useful for all. I think at this stage, I try to put the framework and some hot topics that we could maybe deep dive later. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. All good. I've got lots of questions in my hand I would like to ask you guys. Where should I start? I see that there is a question online, and I'll come back to that in a second. But first of all, I'd like to reflect on the fact that somehow I was expecting, and Olga, thank you very much for those differentiation, which have already expanded our framework of thinking, highlighting how quality assurance focus on teaching and learning, while rankings focus on the research and voluntary versus the compulsory aspects and internationalization element. But I was expecting somehow that the word excellence would have come up in this initial conversation, and perhaps also the enhancement element, because I was wondering whether there may be an area where quality assurance and ranking could start to come together by thinking around enhancement and excellence. Where I'm coming from is quality assurance usually has traditionally measured baseline standards, letting what Helen was referring to, independent and autonomous universities excel in their own different ways. And but at the same time, quality assurance agencies have also, many of them have a mission to support enhancement beyond baseline requirements. And rankings have traditionally tried to measure excellence, or certain types of excellence, depending on the criteria used to form the ranking. So could there be something there where quality assurance agencies could be able to use ranking to support enhancement? Somehow each you hinted that at government level, whereby you were saying that the important thing is not to focus on the rank, but to look at the data and use the data to drive improvement at system level. So my reflection is, do you have any consideration to share around the issue of excellence enhancement, and whether there may be something there to think about between the two systems? I don't know who, rather than selecting an order, does anyone would like to come in there? Ishan, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all the participants so far, for all the really great and important points to consider here. I think first of all, I want to reaffirm that in no context that I've worked in has our rankings or use of the data behind the rankings ever replaced or thought to be a replacement of fundamental quality assurance systems, which, again, points have been made, are somehow localized. They sometimes can be regionally quite specific as well. I know the GCC, for example, has a number of initiatives to support kind of more cross-fertilization of quality assurance practices there. And even then, INQAAHE acting as a kind of global standard. So again, I don't know of where these two necessarily intersect in the current existing practices. But just to touch upon a few points on excellence and related to some of the comments made by the participants. First of all, Lynette, it's such a great viewpoint to have from the African context. And in 2024, Times Higher Education worked with the MasterCard Foundation to produce what we call the Sub-Saharan African rankings. It's only 129 universities across that region that participated. Happy to say that 10 were from Kenya. But that was one of the first times where we actually deviated significantly from the traditional research intensive focus of the ranking. And just to reflect on some of the pillars of innovation we had in there, we didn't always. We talked about access and fair participation. We measured things by, there was a student engagement survey within that as well. So there have been regional or country-based rankings that we've done where we have moved outside of that research intensive focus. And I think probably the most obvious example of that, and this is referring to Olgun's point about sustainable development goals, is our impact rankings, which was released in 2019. So it's in its sixth iteration now. Again, around 2,500 universities participating. A much more fundamentally difficult ranking to grasp because there's over 200 metrics in that spread across the 17 SDGs. What does this mean in reality? First of all, it's not a research intensive ranking, so far more participants are in there that would not normally appear or be even eligible for the World University Rankings in terms of research publications. There's many different pillars which are measured related to community engagement, stewardship of the SDGs as well. And it's also broken down by individual SDG. So when I looked at SDG 7, which was clean and renewable energy, if I remember correctly, 11 out of the top 100 universities in the world there were from India. And, it came to me a very obvious point that emerged from me was like, we've had an energy crisis in the UK for the last 5 years, basically. Do UK universities ever turn to Indian universities for solutions and to find out what they are doing and what they are researching and how they are approaching it? So I think, again, it's all about the use of rankings, right? And again, it's not necessarily about quality. It could be about partnership building. It could be about finding different types of synergy and best practice in different areas of the university. So I think, again, my take on this is that we shouldn't necessarily worry too much if there is an intersecting point between rankings and quality assurance. But the field can be quite wide in terms of what a rankings could potentially do. And I think whether you want to call it a rating system or an index, the fundamental principles still lie behind that. In the UK, we have the Research Excellence Framework, for example. It's not a ranking, but a university can see where they lie in the Research Excellence Framework. And they may use that to think about interventions internally. more broadly speaking, you have the Human Development Index, which we use as a measure of a kind of country's human development. And again, no one's beating from the clouds that they're number one in that Human Development Index, but it just can give a way of understanding that relative position of the country and what can be done to change policies there. So again, for me, it's all about the use of data for strategic interventions around those areas, but also consideration that where we have had more regional or local based encounters, we do try to take into account those local specificities. Just one final thing to have on this is, it could be related to quality, I'm not sure, but this is really about the culture of data use and data submission and data participation, which is, potentially related to some of the challenges that Olgun identified with AI. Quality assurance, as identified by everyone here, is peer reviewed. It's a longer process fundamentally. I would disagree that rankings is a shortcut way to do that, because actually the submission processes and data collection and verification processes are very intense at both the university level and at the rankings agency level as well. So, to look at the qualitative evidence submissions on the impact rankings for the number of universities across the number of SDGs is an enormous undertaking. So there is actually a lot of engagement there, and we have we have customer teams that work with universities all the time to talk through those evidence and verify and quality assure those processes as well. But I've worked with governments that have, let's say, more rudimentary approaches to data. They are newer in terms of their history, in terms of their overall approach to quality assurance. I'll just give one example. There's a country in Central Asia that only has 4 universities ranked. That's not an issue in itself, but the government mandates around 60 of them to submit data to us, just so they can use that as a framework for monitoring and evaluating the actual data submission process itself. So not really even necessarily about rank or worry about, are we catching up on research or anything like that, but really about creating the culture internally of that data participation and use of data. So that's a journey. And I think, what we see there is that some governments have identified that aligning it to the World University Rankings framework can be of use. Not the end goal, and by no means the only driving force behind it, but it can be of use to help those alignments.
Thank you very much, Ishan. Just very quickly looking at some of the questions that have been asked. Some you have already addressed, Ishan, and Eddie basically asked the fundamental question. We are looking at it now. Both are complementary in the sense I'm curious of their relationship at the conceptual and technical perspective. We may probably be able to unpack some of those dimensions. There is a questions on does an over-reliance or ranking risk misleading prospective students in the selection of a higher education institutions? We can go back to that, but perhaps I can link this question to something that somehow has emerged in some of the observation. And then I go back to you, Olgun, and also we would like to see what Ellen has to reflect on these considerations. Ellen, you said at the very beginning that there is one of the perceived benefits of ranking is the simplicity of the information that it is conveyed to stakeholders, to students. It's very easy to digest a ranking 1, 2, 3 rather than reading a quality assurance report. Olgun referred to shortcuts that perhaps is not really a shortcut, but again, it has to do with the simplicity of the message, the digestibility of the message. So is there something that quality assurance agencies can learn from rankers in order to be more useful to students, even if, and is there anything that ranking can also learn from quality assurance agencies in order to be more useful to students? Because ranking, as Ishan was saying, don't capture the student voice. So there are some areas of possible convergence and learning from each other there. But Olgun, over to you.
Thank you. Let me clarify the shortcut issue. I mean, no offense for anybody, neither the rankings nor the higher education institutions. Sometimes shortcut could be better way. But my point was, in terms of duration, in terms of processes, for example, in the accreditation, we have the internal quality assurance, which is really the main work that they do themselves before we go as external quality assurance and reviewer. So it's maybe a double in terms of workload, and it's maybe doubled or sometimes tripled in terms of duration. That was my reference. Of course, the job performed is really valuable and appreciated. And with the new technology, I think they can maybe speed up and get the existing data from their database and share and collect and use it. So that's much more practical in a way. But in our accreditation procedures, sometimes they are really tough and rigid and complicated. That was my reference. Coming to the excellence and enhancement, thanks Fabrizio. I think these are the two key words that really highlights the correlation between the two sides, ranking and accreditation. Absolutely, that's the ultimate goal, to achieve it. So what I would suggest, what I have experienced through the years, higher education institutions are really eager to go for ranking, let's say. They push a lot and have the data, and they are ranked somewhere really good for their scale, and after a year or two they start going down in terms of their participation and value. Same for accreditation. I mean, having an accreditation for 4 years, 5 years is not the ultimate goal. It's maybe just the beginning. So they get the accreditation for 5 years. They do nothing during the 5 years, and when it comes to the renewal, they start working and speeding up and submitting again. So it has to be taken and owned by the higher education institutions for the both rankings and quality assurance perspective. It's their ultimate goal and job to achieve the excellence and enhancement for their own institution, for their own stakeholders, especially for students, as you referred. So that's, I think, paramount for me. I would really say that yes, we get criticism for both sides, whether it's ranking or accreditation, for different reasons. You name it. It's the quality of data, it's the methodology, process time, and so forth, engagement of stakeholders, and so forth. So therefore, we have to really maybe sit and discuss with the loops and the gaps, so that where we can align and come up with a better methodology and coordination and collaboration. Again, last but not least, I would say that it's like having a double crown, you know, being a really ranked somewhere good on the one hand, and having an international accreditation on the other hand would really give them a double impact, isn't it? So I take it that way rather than competition. It's purely complementary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olgun. Ellen, would you like to come in here? Any consideration from this initial exchanges, in particular around possible synergies and complementarity between the two systems?
Okay, so I'll come in with perhaps a bit divergent view, which you might accept. There is no correlation between rankings and quality assurance. Let's be absolutely clear. Quality assurance is an international process of policies and principles, largely regulated. Rankings are a commercial operation with no regulation. There is no definition about the indicators that they choose, and no, they are not accurate indicators of research. In fact, there's a lot of discussion around how research is assessed, and there's no correlation at all between it and the REF, which is a peer-reviewed process. So, and it operates in the UK. So there's none of that. I mean, I think we need to be clear as to what we've got here. And I don't see quality assurance as it looks at data, which it does need to look at and which is increasingly a part of the exercise, reliant on using rankings as an indicator, because as Ashan has rightly mentioned, it's a voluntary exercise and less than 2,000 institutions may participate in that out of upwards of 100,000 or more higher education institutions in the world. The difficulty with even beginning to integrate it into it is because it goes back to the very principle that I mentioned and Lynette mentioned, is that you're measuring everyone according to the same criteria. And institutions do different things. And the issue of what equals, quote, excellence varies as to whether you're regionally focused, you're widening participation, you're in a developing country, you're in a resource-intensive scenario. So I think one needs to be very careful that when we get into looking at the indicators and we get into looking at the objective of the rankings, they vary, rankings and quality assurance vary considerably. Indeed, at this stage, I would suggest that rankings are primarily a methodology for trying to expand what is, as Ashan rightly and correctly described, as a consultancy business. So that's fine, but there's no evidence that institutions have improved their quality by through the rankings process. The mention of using the SDGs, and that is a growing area of interest in looking at impact. The difficulty with how it's measured, indeed, by the impact ranking that THE runs, what is it? It's just less than a third or so that is based on some kind of objective data, assuming we accept the research data as appropriate and meaningful. I use the word meaningful. The rest of it is institutional data. And again, he rightly refers absolutely to the resource intensity of providing that information. It's really quite a lot of work. And now you've got the institutions pulling all this information together and effectively handing it over. I think the question that arises for most people in that process, which you have in QA, it's an open process. You see the report, you may not want to read it. That is a problem. There is no doubt about it. It's not internationally comparable. That is an issue, and so on. There are lots of issues, but at least you know what the process is and you know what the criteria is. I'm not sure anyone knows how all this data that people submit under the impact, which is assessed behind closed doors, and now accepting the quantity of it, they're now going to do it with AI, which I don't know. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe it's not. But I expect that's another. So, I mean, in answer to Olgan's initial provocation of could they be joined together, I think I would effectively join indeed with Ashan there and saying they're doing two very different things, two different audiences, two different purposes, and very different objectives.
Thank you very much, Helen. That's very clear. I was going to reflect based on previous considerations made by colleagues around the expansion of both quality assurance and ranking in two dimensions which are beyond teaching and learning research, such as the university societal impact. Perhaps there could be something there where we are both trying to capture university contribution, societal contribution. Could they come together around those areas, such as the SDG and sustainability? Something to be seen. But you're absolutely right. From a very pragmatic point of view, they seem to serve and originated to serve different purposes, and that explains many of the main differences. Nicoletta Brez shares an observation. Quality assurance is, at least at the first step, a competition with itself, but rankings are about the competition with others. That's an interesting way of putting it. But however, Ishan also mentioned how rankings can be used, the data and the opinion rankings can be used by universities to improve themselves along those dimensions which are which are being ranked, and quality assurance, yes, is also a way to compete with the sector somehow. But moving on from there, there was I'm going to look at other questions that are being asked here. So Julie Till, some national authorities tend to focus international collaboration on high performers in institutional rankings, missing out on potentially useful partnerships based on subject expertise. How do we address this issue? Julie, thank you very much for the question. There is an important question there, because at times, at least it seems to me, that the idea that quality assurance and rankings are trying to do the same things may be due by the perceptions or the misperception by perhaps government bodies that may use ranking as a proxy for quality. And yeah, please, Ellen, you want to come in there?
Yeah, so I was going to say, I mean, there's no doubt that rankings are used. I mean, there isn't a government I talk to that may not refer to it, a government minister that's referring to and talking to investors and references all this stuff and so on. They're particularly interested in looking at long-term trends. I mean, you know, people are putting their hands up and saying, oh my gosh, what's happening in terms of research, a rise of I mean, that's been evident, and rankings are a reflection backwards, they're not a reflection forward. You know, they're looking at that tracking going and how that has gone. So that kind of reshaping geopolitically is quite interesting, and you've got a consistency. Having said that, in fairness to the Times, the only one I really would look at is the academic ranking of world universities, because the indicators have been unchanged, and there you don't get that change of methodology or weightings and stuff that the other rankings bring in themselves, Times or QS or whatever. I mean, you've got consistency, so that gives you some kind of basis to look at it. And absolutely. But does it help to improve and enhance quality? Does that help to improve across the wide missions of institutions? Even looking, and I would dispute the fact that they don't look at outputs, they do. I mean, if looking at student learning outcomes and graduate learning and learning outcomes, which is Lynette mentioned in terms of Bologna, is a key feature. You see that also in the US, the way the accreditation system works. And indeed, since Obama, and again, it's coming in more and more, looking at obviously learning outcomes, which is a tricky thing looking at employability. It's a really tricky thing to assess and measure. So putting them into a ranking doesn't make it easier to measure. And that's why I use the term meaningful all the time, because it's always a question of not what we've got data for, but can we find information and data for what we think is really meaningful and worthwhile measuring? And that's the tricky bit. That is actually quite tricky.
Absolutely. I think that's the crux of the matter. What is it really that we want to measure? What kind of information we want to have in order to inform government's priorities, students' priorities, institutional priorities? Ishan, over to you, and then Lynette.
Yeah, no, please, Lynette, you should go. I've already spoken a couple of times. I'll go
Lynette. Lynette, you have the floor, unless I'm aware that your connection may be unstable at the moment. So perhaps we have lost her for the second. Ishan, if you can go ahead.
Yeah, just to say, again, when we think about rankings, I think, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of valid criticism in terms of methodology. I think there's also, in my opinion, a very, very assertive criticism on principle, which may or may not actually reflect various opinions around the world, particularly within government. Just to answer Julie's point, I think that's really important. I actually, in the consultation with the UGC of India on the kind of recommendations on the use of rank for joint and dual degree programs, for example, I was at pains to ensure that subject level rank at least was integrated into that approach, as well as significantly extending the borderline of the ranking category as well, because I think it was very contained in the first instance. So that's up to governments to work with their own universities and other stakeholders, as well as in some cases ourselves, to have that kind of guidance. We always encourage, as I said, moving beneath those kind of just a high level rank and thinking about different metric pillars that we use. I think again it's important. Ellen's made a lot of points, some of which I would disagree with. I think there's absolute evidence from a number of countries in their own context to show that improvements in various metrics, I'm not saying overall rank, do evidence improvements that they have made investments in and strategic decisions in, which are now coming into play in various aspects. And I can think of a number of countries from Southeast Asia and East Asia where this has been the case, as well as some emerging situations in the Gulf region and even North Africa as well. So again, yes, that will depend on how you define quality, how you define mission and values. I will say again, there's lots of different perspectives on this around the world. Part of it is understanding what the challenges are facing those individual countries and why there is the engagement, for example, with rankings in the first place. I think one of the questions refers to competition amongst universities. I think that happens. I think that happens anyway, with or without rankings, quite frankly. Where we do see good use of it is actually when the data is used to enhance collaborations and actually have more realistic understanding of what strategic partnership outcomes could look like in research, in industry. Just one final point as well on the change of methodology. Again, I can see how as a sector that can not always potentially play out that well. One of the reasons why we introduced changes to the research methodology was precisely to, I suppose, stop the phenomenon of some publications distorting, and from a few academics within institutions, massively distorting the overall research impact. Beyond that, we introduced the industry metrics to try and get a sense more of how there was that translational element between university research and industry outputs, particularly measured by patents. And we've also tried to review our internationalization metrics, again, just to get a better understanding of the evolving nature of the international outlook of universities as well. This does make it harder to compare over time. But I think we've also done that sincerely in consultation with the university groups, and also again we've kind of varied weightings and metric pillars depending if we're doing certain localized rankings. So, for example, the Arab university rankings is very much distinct for the Arab region, and I made the point earlier about the sub-Saharan African rankings as well.
Thank you very much, Hishan. Thank you, and all good.
Thank you. I think, yeah, this is really an interesting discussion. I knew that it's going to go somewhere. We'll explore something that, as I said, maybe this is the first time we are really publicly and openly discussing with the ranking professionals' presence. This dialogue is really important. I think we should really continue with this, because ranking is a reality globally, and they are really having different types of addition or value or impact for the higher education institutions. As mentioned earlier, the audience is higher education institutions, and through that, the students and the industry. So I think the ultimate goal is therefore similar. In terms of objective, yes, we have to really highlight and emphasize the importance of quality assurance. That's where I was really trying to get rankings into our space so that they can also add the quality assurance component through that. Now, at this stage, I think it's really important in terms of scalability, productivity, research, development, international comparisons, you name it. But at this stage, I think I could ask maybe Ishan, that can rankings use accreditation as a criteria or quality assurance as a criteria in their rubric, for example, would be a beginning of some interaction? Just an idea or food for thought.
Thank you. Yeah,
sorry.
Ishan. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I don't see why not. But I'll be honest and say that just in this immediate conversation, without having a lot of time to have thought about it, I'm not sure what it would bring necessarily to either the rankings or the accreditation and regulatory space.
Or credibility?
I mean, potentially, you know, we would probably need to do some kind of consultation there.
Yeah.
I think, you know, we're always fairly clear about the limitations as well of our rankings. Its use by students, by universities, by governments, by the media. You know, that's a different issue, probably outside of the scope of this conversation. But I think if you were to follow down this space, Organ, I think, you know, it would need to be carefully thought through, really think of what added value it brings. Credibility is something that, again, has a variety of subjective kind of lenses to it. So yeah, it would need to be thought through, and I think and of real value to the global higher education and its actual mission of improving education for people.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ishan. Yeah. Ellen, and then Lynette, you wanted to come in earlier. If you want to come in now, Ellen, go ahead.
Yeah, again, I would agree with Ashad. I'm not quite sure. I mean, the Indians have tried to do the reverse and set up some integrated. The problem you have is straight off the quality assurance is which clearly both have lots of faults. Solving them, dealing with those faults and limitations isn't about bringing them together. It's dealing with the purpose for what they are and trying to deal with them.
Yeah.
I don't think it bringing them together is going to sort that. And one of quality assurances is certainly the issue around the quantum and the resource intensity and the time. But everything's in resource intensity. I was referring to the impact rankings as resource intensive, and the number of universities and indeed governments that I've spoken to who want to set up special units for about rankings. No, they need to be setting up special units of data and strategic data analysis, of which maybe that data might feed into rankings, maybe it might feed into other kinds of planning, but not just an office looking at rankings. There is no doubt that at the end of the day, the rankings issue has put to the forefront the importance of strategic data. But time has also moved on, and many of the issues that countries are facing around inequality, widening participation, societal impact, all these other issues that we face, including regional disparities, communities feeling left behind, within country inequality almost becoming a bigger issue than between country inequality. The question is our rankings, which pursue this idea of world-class excellence, really where we want to be going? Or are there other issues that we really need to focus on? And, you know, without making a big issue, have we contributed to a lot of these inequalities by referencing some institutions as better than others? Our students don't go to them. So if we look at what are listed as these top 100, or indeed a bit higher in that number, we're dealing with less than 4% of the international student population. Our students don't go to those institutions. Are we funding them accordingly? Are we putting the resources into them?
Thank you, Ellen. And again, it really goes down to what I think all of us somehow have said at certain at different points, which is different purposes. What are the purposes of the two systems are trying to meet and fulfill? Somehow, in my view, quality assurance has always been around a reassurance, accountability, a reassurance about minimum standards. And the rankings have always provided a benefit in providing guidance to government, to students about what to choose. I remember when I was in China one time doing reviews of transnational education operations in China, I was being asked by the minister or the Ministry of China, which institution is actually better than? You've come here to China, you reviewed UK TNE operations in China, which one is the better? We are not looking at which one is the better, we're just looking at threshold standard, then they are free to excel in different ways, but a ranking can offer an answer to those questions in terms of which one is the better, but then the question is better for what? Then you have to define criteria.
I mean, again, you need to look at the international student market, if you want to call it that. It's equally quite small. So for them who have what I call the resources to travel, then the difference between being number 50 and being number 60 might be meaningful. But for the overwhelming majority of our countries, we really need to look at what are those major policy things, and making policy on the basis of rankings can be distortionary. And so those become, in fairness, that's not rankings problem. That's a problem of those who are using them. But it is, you know, arguably a message to the consultancy side of the equation saying, you know, be careful that you're not making policy decisions based on only a fraction of the information.
Thank you, Ellen. Now I'm going back to some of the, Lynette, please, please go ahead.
I'm sorry about this, but I just wanted to mention that what we have observed, and as Ishan observed before, just before I dropped off some time back, is that we do have countries in Africa, especially the southern part, and several other countries, probably no more than 20, that are participating actively in university rankings. Kenya included. Kenya is my country. And we observe sometimes that universities that are ranked, you know, they look forward to rankings every year. And what happens is that they then aspire to get better than they were last year, or at least to retain their position. And in so doing, they put in effort, at least in the areas that are part of the criteria, the ranking criteria, like in research and so on. Although occasionally, what we see in the ranks is not reflected on the ground in the quality. So when you visit a university for quality assurance purposes and look at, for example, their record keeping, their data situation, you will find that it is not as up to speed as one would expect of a university that has been well ranked, or at least reasonably ranked. So as INQAAHE has brought us to the table, I think we need to see how to get these things to work together so that at the end of the day, ultimately there is improvement, because ranking brings signals comparative information or data or performance to the world all at once. But quality assurance is painstaking. It will take time before we can see any improvement, although it gives the university information not to find fault with it. We don't fault find, we fact find. Then we give the facts to the university and tell them to tell us how they intend to improve. So there's always the improvement aspect that is very important towards excellence. We aspire to excellence. We are here now. How can we get there? I'm not sure whether the ranking effort advises universities, for example, on how to do better next time, what they can do to do better, or the stakeholders, for example, what to have a stakeholder engagement or participation that would then carry universities forward in terms of improvement towards excellence. So there are things, or there are aspects of ranking that help the quality assurance, because they cause universities to focus on a particular area, which most likely is one of the criteria for quality assurance. Like if it's research, if it's student admission, if it's student support, we are happy with that. And so I think, as you say, there are areas where we can evolve together for purposes of improvement.
Thank you very much, Lynette. So the two systems working together to promote enhancement and excellence of education systems. Now, I'm aware that I may not have been able to read all the questions I've received. I've read one comment from Cesar. I'm not ignoring your questions. I'm trying to multitask, and multitasking might not be one of my greatest skill. But and there was one question that you asked that I thought Isham may have already answered, which was around the impact ranking now becoming a rating. And perhaps, Isham, if you can elaborate on the rationale behind the change of terminology around the impact ranking.
Sure. I'll caveat this by saying that it's somewhat out of my wheelhouse. It's not I'm not in the data team or the commercial team that have kind of created this. But I think, broadly speaking, we felt that, with the evidence data resource, we required a kind of membership network to ensure that the kind of use of that time was resourceful. We also feel that the rating system is more in keeping with the overall values behind the impact ranking. Behind impact as a concept. So moving it to a rating system, I don't know 100% what that's going to look like in the end. I know that the transformation team working on that are doing that at the moment. So I don't want to give too much information that I don't know about. So my feeling is that it's meant to be more orientated as a membership network now, rather than a kind of competitive ranking, let's say.
Thank you, Ishan. That's really helpful. There is an interesting reflection from Annelie Willens. I won't read it all, but it goes in similar lines to what Julie Till earlier on Samai pointed out, which is about making sure that those who use ranking understand exactly what rankings are measuring, and also what is the differences between quality assurance and ranking. So perhaps one area of cooperation between quality assurance bodies and ranking bodies is making sure that everyone understands the key differences. Do not misunderstand one system with another. And thank you very much, Annelie. So just to read the last bit of your reflection, more sensitization campaigns need to be done to educate university leaders and strategic planning offices about international ranking and when the most appropriate time is to chase after it, in relation, particularly in order for them not to forget quality assurance, but making sure that the two support each other. And it is very important, I believe, for governments to understand that as well. Thank you very much, everyone. All good. I can see that you have unmuted yourself. Is that because you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, maybe a few remarks. I think thanks for the whole contribution. First, we all know that we have diploma meals from the higher education institutions perspective. We have ranking meals from the ranking side, and unfortunately, we have accreditation meals as well. So we are really in a challenging higher education world. So we have to. That's my point. I mean, argument that we have to really at least not unite, but at least to coordinate, collaborate, and really connect so that we can overcome these challenges. That's the first thing. And then there are some keywords we have to really make it common for both or across the board. I would say transparency, as we all use in our accreditation and quality assurance processes, authenticity, and this is about the quality of data that we all are concerned. And the ultimate goal is, of course, to build trust. That's what we are trying to achieve. So once we get there and really collaborate, that could have a much broader impact. Maybe the final remarks, I would say that's why we need to really stand strong and collaborate and close the loop for the excellence and enhancement of higher education altogether. I think that's my takeaway, to be honest, from all these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. I'd like to conclude. I'm conscious of time, and Olga, I think you started us off in a good way with a round of final considerations. I would like to go round to all the panelists and ask you whether you would like to share some final thoughts on the topic from what has been discussed today. Ishan, shall I go to you first?
Yeah, thanks, Fabrizio. Well, I guess I'll loop back to where I started at the beginning, which is, that I personally don't have any investment in rankings themselves. What I have discovered over time, and I think this speaks to something that Ellen mentioned about, the strategic use of data. I think that for me is the most important thing. I think monitoring and evaluating impact is an extremely important thing. A year and a half ago, we released the Transnational Education 3.0 framework, which is my personal pet project. That's where my passion lies, is in TNE. And again, I brought into play some suggested metrics that we have already in our SDG metrics from impact, and maybe some of the World University Rankings metrics. But actually, the report also pointed out that in each national situation, it would really need to be quite bespoke. So when I think about the emerging enormous TNE ecosystem developing in Kazakhstan, or the forthcoming ecosystem developing in India. We've done work for the Knowledge and Human Development Authority in Dubai. All of those were about saying, well, what is all this TNE going to do for the students and the economic and social and sustainable objectives of those countries moving forward? Are they giving the skills graduates need for the future? Are they kind of bringing innovation and entrepreneurship into economies that previously have lacked the skill sets to produce those from the university sector as well? Because everyone is in a different kind of state in terms of their evolution. And I remember interviewing some Indian academics, again, right at the beginning of this TNE thing back in 2022. And, he said to me, everyone always has a go at us about pedagogy and that, about by rote learning and that kind of older system of teaching and learning and assessment. But we don't know, we don't have any expertise to tell us how to change that. So actually, that's what we want from TNE. We want to learn new things from other faculty, from other countries about transforming pedagogy. Now, there isn't a metric to capture that in ranking, but it is about the impact of TNE on those host societies. So, yeah, I think it's a big debate in terms of what rankings can bring, but I think the key here is for me to understand what that strategic use of data can look like to measure impact, and therefore what quality assurance plays in that role as well. Does it need to become more of an input-output system, which is co-joined somehow? I think there's an argument for that. Rankings doesn't necessarily have to be involved in that, but we've seen that in the UK, maybe not that successfully with the OFS experiment and the kind of output-led data. There's challenges in that. There needs to be a lot of thinking around that, I think.
Thank you very much, Ishan. Ellen and then Lynette.
So thanks very much. I join with everyone else in thanking for organizing this and chairing this, Fabrizio, and to INQAAHE. Yeah, lots of interesting questions. No doubt, higher education about quality and relevance is center stage in a lot of countries, everywhere, I would almost argue. Not least about the questions I asked earlier, but also in terms of public support, funding. All these wide sets of issues are a key one. And quality and relevance sits at the bottom of it. And I expect in response to what everyone else has said, certainly my experience working internationally is that this seems to be one of the main issues out there. On the one of the questions asked in terms of about relevance for society, quality assurance needs to deal better with these issues. Sure, higher education needs to do better with these issues. For a long time, it seems to me that these were issues that it never really thought, well, that's not really our job. We deal with the student entering, and once they leave, that's up to them. That argument doesn't hold water anymore. It's a bigger issue, and likewise beyond the campus is a bigger issue. But it's not just engagement, and the problem with the rankings is they measure engagement. Well, patents, you can, that's just a question of putting in money to register something as a patent. That's not real impact, and impact is down the road, and it's not quite clear, and so on. So it's a really difficult thing. I've worked with the commission on this. It's a really difficult thing to measure. And do we show engagement with SMEs? Do we show engagement with the community around the institution, or is it engagement just internationally that matters? So those kinds of issues really are of importance, and we're yet to get to a base, I think, of how we can understand that completely. I would end with just two comments. One, again, a comment raised in the last comment there by Annesley is the importance of international accreditation for graduates. Whether they stay at home, they're working internationally. Nowadays, everyone is part of the global talent pool. And regardless, it's the accreditation that they have, that their qualification is recognized and meets a standard, that's important. And that's what the global recognition of qualifications is all about. And that's why accreditation in a system that is internationally supported is absolutely vital. I would say the other area that we need to look at and is this absence of international comparative data. UNESCO has some, rather. The EU is now pulling everything together under the observatory, which is an excellent move. OECD is expanding, and of course it has PISA and TALIS and PIAC, and it did want to move into a halo, but it is also expanding. And here we're talking about the governance and ownership of public data, not the privatization of public data, but the public governance of data, of ownership, and the management of it. And that, I think, is an important issue that we do need to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Lynette, would you like to share some final thought before I wrap up?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's participation and input. Just to say something about what Olgun mentioned, that the people we serve are increasingly demanding for accountability and transparency. Students, who are our primary stakeholder in education, for example, are increasingly wanting to be at the table where decisions about what counts for quality are made, what counts for a rank are made. So the voice of students as our primary stakeholders is required. They are demanding to be present, to be heard. We may be doing things thinking we are serving them, but until they tell us so, we are probably just running our shows. Now, back to quality assurance, where we are talking about excellence, we are talking about value for money, we are talking about fitness for purpose. Until we can respond to the emerging issues in these areas, as things change, as modes of delivery change, as modes of access to education change, we probably are going to have to come around the table again more and more. In fact, in my view, this conversation that we've had today this is certainly not going to be the last time we are going to sit around the table to have this conversation. And probably the next one, we should reach out to some students and put them on the panel so that we really can hear from the host's mouth. The whole matter of meals, whether they are accreditation meals, diploma meals, ranking meals, again, is a matter that we have to speak to because increasingly, I think people are becoming more and more daring, especially as online learning becomes more and more pronounced. It's easier to hide somewhere and offer online degrees now than it was previously. So thank you very much, Fabrizio and INQAAHE team as a whole for thinking about this. This is a conversation whose time has come and which we must not stop until we can serve our clientele better in whatever area. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, Lynette. This is indeed a continuing conversation, possibly a starting point for further conversation. Before we wrap up, I'd like to remind you of two things which are related. First of all, that in relation to the issue that Lynette Olgun mentioned around accreditation meals, and also in relation to what Ellen was saying around the Global Recognition Convention, and I thank you, Ellen, to raise the importance of Global Recognition Convention and the importance of quality assurance to underpin the implementation of the Global Recognition Convention. INQAAHE has revised its international standards and guidelines, and we should be ready to launch them very soon, possibly in the next couple of weeks, in association with the revised ISG review process. So this is the process through which INQAAHE review international quality assurance agencies and accreditation bodies against international standards of good practice. And we hope that this robust systems through which we will review international quality assurance agencies will contribute to play a role in developing an international higher education areas underpinned by the Global Recognition Convention. So stay tuned. We will, once we are ready to launch the revised international standards and guidelines and ISG review scheme, we will do a webinar on this. And then finally, I'd like to conclude that just by reminding you that these conversations will continue at the INQAAHE Forum, which will take place in February, the first week of February. If you go on the INQAAHE website, you can find information about the INQAAHE Forum. You can register. You can still submit proposals for presenting at the INQAAHE Forum, and we very much look forward to seeing you there and continuing the conversation there. And finally, I'd like to conclude by thanking the four excellent panelists. It was great to have a real exchange of views and opinions coming from different angles. And also thank you for all the participants who have connected and joined the conversation. And I apologize if I've missed out on any questions that I haven't read, but I believe that the speakers may have addressed most of those questions, even if I haven't asked them. With this, I conclude. Thank you again to everyone, and I look forward to seeing you soon.